Hey PC gamers, and welcome back to the PC Gamer Chat Log. I am Lauren Morton.
Hey everyone, I'm Molly Taylor.
And we have another special interview episode for you, again from GDC, one of the roundtables that we hosted. This one, again, hosted by our senior editor, Wes Fenlon.
Hello, I am back once again to do more roundtable introductions. This
Wes,
was
you
a
did
fun one.
so much at GDC.
It was a really busy week. It was, but it was fun. And these roundtables are something that we're hoping to make an annual tradition. And I had organized a couple at GDC in 2023, but we wanted to do it bigger and better this year. Have a more professional like recording studio record them at, rather than the sort of ad hoc thing that I'd done in the past, and get together some people who were kind of worthy of that. That level of production, and I think we pulled it off.
Nice. And what was this other panel that you did? Which one is this one?
Yeah, so this is our PC gaming veterans roundtable. So it's folks who've been in the games industry since at least the 90s. I think everyone on this panel actually either started in the 80s or like in 1990, like, you know, so close, like we'll call it 80s. And I wanted to represent sort of a range of different kinds of developers and designers on this panel, and got together some people who I personally admire and love the games that they've made, including Jordan Mechner, the creator of Prince of Persia, Warren Spector, who you might know for Deus Ex, among some other games, Charles Cecil, who created the Broken Sword series, which is another like classic point and click adventure series. Jordan Mechner worked on a point and click game as well. And then Khris Brown, whose name might not be as well known as other folks on this panel, but she was the voice director as well as working as like an audio editor, casting, creative voice direction for like 100 games, a ton of Ubisoft games, more significantly to me, like all of the LucasArts games from the 90s. That have, you know, if it has voices and LucasArts made it, like Khris Brown worked on it pretty much. And so all of their really fun 90s adventure games, you know, the Grim Fandangos and all of those, she is responsible for the people talking in those games, which is pretty awesome. So yeah, this is kind of a rare opportunity. You don't see all of these people in one place at one time too often. So I wanted to make sure I could get them all in a room and get them to tell some 80s and 90s war stories and talk about the old technology they had to deal with making games and some of their fun celebrity encounters making games. We got a little quick Mark Hamill story in here. So yeah, a lot of good stuff.
Nice. Well, then, without delaying any further, we will head over to listen to the rest of that conversation from all of the veterans you assembled in PC gaming. Thanks, Wes.
Hey everyone, welcome to a roundtable at GDC with PC Gamer. So excited to have you here. I'm going to go ahead and go around the room and ask you to introduce yourselves and tell us a little bit about, you know, give us the short list of some games you've worked on that people may know. And for like a little fun bit of trivia, I'd love to hear the first computer game that you ever remember playing, and the most recent computer game that you've played. Warren, can we start with you?
Sure. I'm Warren Spector. I've been making games for 40 years at various companies on various platforms. Let's see. The first game I remember playing was Pong. Thank you very much. Nobody make fun of me. And I've worked on Deus Ex and System Shock and Thief and a bunch of Ultima games and Epic Mickey and more that I'm probably forgetting.
And what's the most recent game you've played, Warren?
The most recent game I've played is probably Ghost of Tsushima.
Okay. Jordan?
So my first games were Karateka and Prince of Persia on the Apple II. And then I went on making games with bigger and bigger teams with Ubisoft Montreal for Prince of Persia, The Sands of Time. And then wrote the first screenplay for the Prince of Persia movie. So I've worked in games and film, and more recently, graphic novels. I've just written a graphic novel memoir of my 40 years making games and movies and books, and have drawn it as well.
Right on. What's the most recent game you played?
This will sound really self-serving, but I'm playing Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown on Nintendo Switch. I really am.
Okay.
Khris Brown, and I started at LucasArts in 1990, so it's been about 30, coming up on 34 years. The games that I've worked on start with Monkey Island and go up to recently play Wayfinders, which is like a MMO. I founded the voice department at LucasArts, and then went on to found the narrative talent group at Ubisoft. So I've worked on everything from Monkey to Grim Fandango to Psychonauts, Assassin's Creed, kind of everything, Lord of the Rings games. First game, Wumpus, still love it. Most recent game, Valheim.
All right.
Great. I'm Charles Cecil. I wrote my first adventure game in 1981 for the Sinclair ZX81, which had 1K of memory, which sounds pathetic, but it actually had almost exactly the same memory and processor power as the computers that landed Apollo 11 on the moon just 10 years earlier. Our best known games at Revolution are Broken Sword, Beneath the Steel Sky, and a host of other adventures. My first game that I remember playing would be Galaxians in the pub, tabletop with, you put your pint on and drink while the other person was playing. So if anybody hasn't been to the Musée Mécanique, which is absolutely superb, then they really should do. Most recently, I've always liked the idea of learning a language through a game. So the game I was playing on the plane over is called Chants of Sinar from Focus.
Oh, beautiful game. Yeah. Okay, so for listeners who may not be deeply familiar with your careers, I'd love to have you each go around and just talk a little bit about how you got into making games. And do you think that the route you took into making games is something that would even be possible for people today? Charles, can we start with you? You're shaking your head.
Yeah, no, I was extraordinarily lucky, and like all of us, well, I mean, hugely privileged to be working in this incredible industry. I mean, we're so lucky. I was thought that I wanted to be an engineer, and I was sponsored by Ford. Fantastic sponsorship. And there was a friend of mine who just started a computer games company. They're called Home Computer Games in those days. And one day he said, you like telling stories, why don't you come and write a game? So I did. I was at university, and it was in those days the UK industry, which was based around Sinclair, was quite different to what was going on in America, which of course was Commodore, or Japan with Nintendo, and nobody knew what anybody else was happening. And then I had my real eye opener was coming to the West Coast Computer Fair in either 1983 or 1984. And what I love about Fisherman's Wharf is nothing's changed. So, I mean, obviously, it's so much harder now. The serendipity of the early 80s gave extraordinary opportunities for people.
Again, similar, not at all a linear path. Was studying environmental studies and needed a 2-week temp job and got assigned to go work at what then I found out was Lucasfilm Games. And after 2 weeks there temping, the director of development, David Fox, said, I think you should stay. You could go into debt and get your college degree, or we could pay you and you could work in computer games. And I had a pet computer through school and had programmed on cassette tapes. So I was all about it and stayed, and it was wonderful. Yeah.
That's amazing.
So I was 13 when a friend of mine got an Apple II, and I fell in love with not programming per se, because I'd never really been very technical. I was more, as a kid, into writing and drawing comics and wanting to make animated films. But I saw this computer as a device that I could use to make what were in effect little interactive animated movies. And at the same time, Space Invaders came into the arcades, and that was the first video game I remember playing that was actually fun and addictive. I mean, nothing against Tank War and Lunar Lander, which were cool next to the pinball machines, but it was really with Space Invaders and with the Apple II that I kind of got diverted. And so all of the interest in narrative and storytelling and animation that I'd had before for comics and movies, I now put into making games on the Apple II and learning to program first in BASIC and then in assembly language.
Well, I was working on my doctorate, and when I say working, you want to hear the air quotes around that, because I was spending an inordinate amount of time playing Dungeons and Dragons, and there came a point where I ran afoul of politics in my department, and was playing games on the side, and got a call one day from a friend who was working at Steve Jackson Games, a little board game company. And he said, we're looking for a designer and developer. Are you interested? And I said, you bet. Dropped out of the PhD program. All I had to do was finish my dissertation, and I would be Dr. Spector. Dropped out to work for a little board game company. My mom cried for 10 years.
Oh, no.
And worked there and at TSR for 6 years. And then there was one day, people don't believe this, but it's true. I was working on a new game system at TSR, and I had percentile dice in one hand and the 6-sided dice in the other. And I looked at my hands and just said, if this is the most important decision I have to make in my career, I need a new career. Mm-hmm. And so I was playing computer games obsessively at that point. Role-playing stuff. I'm not going to name any names because I don't want to lose friends. But I was playing these role-playing games thinking, these people are simulating entirely the wrong things. Mm-hmm. They don't understand what makes role-playing interesting or fun or important. And I happened to be on a panel with Richard Garriott at a convention, and I was sitting there going, oh my God, this guy gets it, this guy gets it, this guy gets it. And then out of the blue, you talk about luck. I was lucky to get my first job at Steve Jackson Games. I was lucky to get a call at TSR. And I got lucky and got a call from Richard Garriott saying, hey, you want to come work here? He liked being on a panel with me. And so I got a job at Origin making computer games. Could anybody follow in my footsteps? There's no way. I mean, there were like 10 people applying for jobs at that point. Now, if we open up a job for hire, we get 300 resumes. I mean, it's impossible now. So, no, I got in at the right time with the right skill set or the ability to convince people I had it. So
Plus, I assume Richard Garriott isn't doing many panels these days, so that avenue is probably closed.
Yeah, that's true. But hey, folks at this table are still doing panels. So, and you know, one thing I've found over the years is that people who make games are by and large pretty nice. Yeah. And they're pretty desperate for attention. No, I mean, sorry, I didn't say that. If you come up and talk to them, they'll pretty much talk to you and help you get along in life.
Yeah.
I think you've probably all had some eclectic, bits of your careers outside of the sort of games that you're known for, the roles in the games that you're known for. I'd love to hear about things that you've done in and around games that were maybe outside of your typical responsibilities a little bit. And Khris, I'd actually like to start with you because I have to know the story behind a couple of your credits on some of the old LucasArts adventure games. Like you were credited for catering on Day of the Tentacle, and you wrote a haiku for Full Throttle.
I did, yeah. And someone asked me, they said, did you know that you don't have a credit in Full Throttle? I was like, what? Yeah. So catering Day of the Tentacle, I am a passionate baker. So yeah, Tim and Dave were fueled by many, many cupcakes, many late nights, many snacks. And in addition to like reading it and saying, yes, is there a tag in it? Or what is the funniest joke on earth? Full Throttle, yeah, we all wrote haikus, so they're in the credits, all of our various haikus. Did you have any other small roles on games over the years that may or may not be credited in the final credits? Oh boy, I mean, there were 60 of us, so we all did a bunch of goofy stuff. I think we had the Disc Gun Club, we had all kinds of silly things that we did. Yeah, we like taught one another yoga in the upstairs meeting rooms. Like it's just, it was a really almost like a college dorm environment. We were all in our early 20s. So Yeah, it's super good. What else? Like teaching Ozzy Osbourne how to use his phone. So that was good.
Tell us more.
He was in a game called Brutal Legend that Double Fine did. So that's more recent. And just couldn't figure out how to text or, do things or whatever. So that was pretty neato and fun. And what a sweet man.
Does anybody else have an Ozzy Osbourne story? But anyone else have any fun little trivia of games that you've worked on outside of your credit in design or writing?
I worked on 2 games that I took my name off of because I don't want to be associated with them. I have never revealed what they are, but if anybody guesses, both games shipped. They just don't have my name on them.
Do you want to give us a hint?
No. No. No, but I've also had a lot of opportunities. The game business has given me opportunities I never would have had otherwise. I've gotten to write a novel set in one of the game worlds that I've helped create. When I was at Disney, I got to write DuckTales comic books, which was a real thrill. No, the third issue of my 4-issue run was the worst comic in the history of humankind. But it was still fun to write them, I've had opportunities to do a lot of stuff.
Jordan, you play a character in The Last Express. Is that right? I mean, I know that's in the credits, but
I did give myself a cameo as a train porter.
What was making that scene like?
Well, to do The Last Express, which was kind of an interactive narrative on board a train with a big cast of characters, we put the actors in these crazy costumes that were designed to be rotoscoped so that when they'd been given the digital treatment, they would look like kind of hand-drawn, animated pen and ink drawings in this Art Nouveau style. So it looked great on the screen, but on the set, it was a nightmare for the actors who had these giant wigs and because, as an actor, you kind of want to wear a costume that's going to put you in the mood. So, you're playing like an elegant lady on board the Orient Express in 1914, and you're wearing this costume with giant red and green patches, like a kind of a Harlequin clown suit, and you're being told, no, it's all for the rotoscope. It's going to be great. So I think the revenge that the crew had on me was the day that I had to put on one of those crazy costumes and go under the hot lights with the blue screen and endure the makeup. And some of the actors came back and said, "Okay, we're gonna do the makeup personally on Jordan ourselves."
Did you have to direct yourself in the scene? Did you have a director who was taking care of that part?
I was directing it, but this was I would jump behind the camera and say, "Okay, this is the angle. This looks good. Okay." And luckily, my role of arguing with another porter over some boxes that were being loaded onto the train wasn't so demanding. I could, I was able to.
You didn't have to give yourself notes on the emotional stakes of the scene.
I didn't have to cry.
Good. You and Charles were both working on adventure games in the 90s, at a time when, at least from my perspective, the LucasArts games were really those were the hot adventure games on the market. I'm just wondering if you have kind of stories about that era in adventure games and what you were kind of looking at what other people were doing and what you were passionate about doing in your own games. I think they both had amazing animation.
Well, I think we owe Roberta Williams and Ken Williams a huge debt of gratitude for really building that whole genre very, very successfully. I was very inspired, and I really admire them both and everything that went at Sierra. But and there is a but. With King's Quest, it was such a ludicrous idea that King Graham of Daventry. It was this sort of old idea of what what England could be. Now Daventry actually is next to Luton Airport. I mean, the only thing that's famous is the 747s. It just made no sense whatsoever. And so what I was actually employed by Activision. When, Warren, you were saying you almost went to work for Mediagenic.
Came this close.
Oh, well, our paths would have crossed earlier. And we all admire Infocom enormously, I'm sure. And so Activision collapsed, Mediagenic collapsed, and I really wanted to go back into writing games again. And there were it felt like it was a very dynamic genre to be in. And I'm very proud that people do talk about, certain interfaces, and there is the Beneath the Steel Sky interface, which was quite revolutionary at the time, and then Broken Sword, which again, so we did innovate. And am I allowed to do a little plug?
Yeah.
A little plug, yeah.
Little plug.
So basically, what we're doing at the moment, which is really exciting, is going back to our original Broken Sword game and taking it from 640, 480 up to 4K. But also, playing some recent adventures, I realised that they're just not fun anymore, and they're just frustrating, and that actually people want to be part of an extraordinary narrative journey that just keeps driving you forward, and that the puzzles should be narrative challenges rather than blockers. And so my absolute obsession at the moment is putting the new version out and seeing how people play. Ultimately, if people have to go and get hints, then they stop feeling smart. And so how do you get that balance between people wanting to feel smart, driving forward in the narrative, but then offering enough of a challenge?
Is that something where you feel like you're going to change how certain bits in the game are represented, or change how you would deliver clues to players?
Well, I mean, simple things, but just taking away hotspots that aren't directly relevant, so that as the player progresses, so they're focused towards the solution. And I don't think in this day and age, and I certainly don't feel patronized, where you just have a little sparkle to say, look, after a little bit of time, just have a look here. You're not giving the answer away, you're just driving. Because ultimately, the point and click is such a wonderfully simple interface. And 101 of game design is you start with simplicity, and complexity emerges from that. Mm-hmm. There is nothing wrong. I would argue that point and click is a great interface. It's just that the adventure as a genre in many cases has been left behind in the 90s. It is my claim.
That's an interesting story. But the thing that interests me is that you're talking about the work you're doing currently. You can plug all you want, man. I'm tempted too. But the fact is, we're talking a lot about our history, mm-hmm. but we're still relevant too. We're still working, still making games. I hope still innovating and showing these young punks what it's all about. I know that one of the founding principles of Other Side, the company I work for now, is there's still room to innovate. This is, I can be a very pretentious guy, and I'm not ashamed of that. But we're an art form. We are the art form of the 21st century, and anybody who thinks we're a solved problem isn't paying attention. So there's still plenty of room to innovate and do things that no one in the world has ever seen or done before. And that's a requirement for any game we do at Other Side. And it's been a requirement for me well, now I'm going back again. It's been a requirement for me for decades. In my mission statement is every game has to have one thing, maybe two. You're stupid if you try three things that no one's ever seen or done before. And it's good to hear that we're all still, hard at work doing what we love.
Yeah, absolutely. There's one other thing I wanted to ask around Last Express and original Broken Sword, and then we can explore some other territory. But I feel like both of those games had in common really striking 2D animation and art in those games. And I'd love to talk a bit about the technical constraints at that time and what you were trying to, how you were able to push against those to work in the rotoscoped characters in The Last Express, which of course you had done in earlier games, but The Last Express really amped that up quite a bit. Yeah,
the rotoscoping that I did for Karateka and Prince of Persia was very simple 2D action animation. So that was straight gameplay. What was difficult in Last Express and really completely insane to even attempt it was we wanted to get the subtleties of the gestures, the acting, because everybody has their own way of walking, their own way of tipping their hat as they pass you in the corridor. Just the raise of an eyebrow, can tell so much. So rotoscoping actors in close-up as well as at a distance, and then trying to fill this 3D rendered interior of the Orient Express with 50 people, all the passengers and crew walking around in real time, doing their thing, passing each other in the corridor, saying bonjour as they passed the player. It was, it was a jigsaw puzzle in 3 dimensions that involved combining the renders with the filmed footage, with a kind of we called it character logic, but the idea was that in many point-and-click games, you sort of feel that the characters are kind of sitting around in their places waiting for you to come and trigger an interaction. And with Last Express, we really wanted to have the feeling that life was just bustling around you, and if you didn't look in the right direction at the right moment, you might miss it. I recently saw a theater production in New York called Sleep No More, where the audience is in the house. It's a several story building, with actors going about playing scenes, and there's props you can look at. There's empty rooms where there are clues, but then you can also see actors who are having an intense dramatic moment. And of course, you're like a ghost as an audience member. They don't react to your presence, but there's something really compelling and powerful about that. And seeing that, I thought of The Last Express. That was kind of what we were trying to capture.
You know that those guys really love games, and the creative director of Punch Drunk, who's I think in London, he's a British guy, and he gives talks, and he just talks to any game makers. So if you love that, and I loved it in New York as well.
Yeah,
but
it's amazing.
The way forward, and it is extraordinary, but the way forward, I think, for them, that they see it, is to really embrace games and understand how interactivity can be pushed even further.
That's really cool. An element there that you're talking about, getting across the personality of the characters, that the NPCs in the game. I feel like, Khris, what you were doing at LucasArts was a huge part of the kind of this idea of storytelling in games through audio, right? Through acting, voice, that when you started was pretty new. There were not a lot of games doing voice acting, right? So I'd love for you to talk about what was it like working with actors in the early 90s at the time? Was it hard for them to even wrap their heads around how their performances were going to appear in a game?
Yeah, absolutely. The only understanding of media that they had was really linear. So explaining interactivity, explaining the possibility of multiple outcomes, tracking emotional consistency throughout the multiple outcomes was a whole thing. I mean, it was a learning experience for us as well. How are we going to structure the scripts? How are we going to set up the recording so that the actors can stay in their own emotional moment and be pure to that? And one of the things that's so neat, Charles, when you were talking, and when we were talking about the now and the difference in the now is... and innovation is the way in which society has changed, so that the performance, there's always the theatrical truths, the storytelling truths that go back to, time immemorial, but it's the context in which those performances will be received that is changing all the time. And that is so exciting. When you're talking about the remaster and stuff, I'm like, oh my gosh, just thinking about how people will be transformed by this art form now, and how it's different from how people were transformed by that, how they were emotionally impacted by these things, and Sleep No More certainly is a fantastic example of storytelling and ways in which the emotional experience, the transformative opportunity of performance can be conveyed to the player. So it was challenging then, and it's always challenging in a new and exciting way as society shifts.
One of the challenges with sound and speech, audio of any kind, is back in '89 when I started at Origin, we had beep, beep, boop, boop as our sound capability. And when Chris Roberts, I worked with Chris on the original Wing Commander game, which was, as far as I know, the first game to have 3D modeled spaceships. I could be wrong about that, but at the time we certainly thought we were first. But it was also a very early attempt to use the ad-lib, the Sound Blaster, and the Roland MT32. That Roland, man, it was incredible. I mean, not anymore, but no, but
it was incredible.
It was.
It was an amazing piece of hardware.
It was a big deal.
But actors didn't know what to do. It's true. And we did some very early cinematics in Wing Commander, so we had to train actors. And I'll tell you one funny story. When we were doing the early sound with the ad lib in particular in this particular story, we got a call in customer service, and by customer service I mean the one person who was sitting at a desk that day. And he got a call from an older gentleman who said, "I'm not getting any sound. I'm supposed to get sound." And it took like hours for the poor person on the phone to figure out that he had removed it from the box, but had not actually inserted it into his computer. That's how primitive it was, though. Nobody knew what to do with sound. Certainly not on the consumer side, and not on the development side either. We were making everything up as we went along. What the heck? I mean. And we're still making stuff up. That's the irony. We're just making different stuff up.
It's true that working with actors, with voice actors, 20, 25 years ago, one of the hurdles was, first of all, the disdain that they had for video games. Like, well, I'm a real actor, but whatever this is, it's going to be silly.
Yeah.
But then also, as storytellers, to try to get them to believe in the reality of this character in this world without having a set built with costumes and all of the paraphernalia that would put them in the mood. What was a challenge in itself, but it was so magic every time. The moment when the actors' eyes would light up and they would suddenly realize that this was a real character, a real situation, and they would start doing it, doing what they were capable of and what they were trained to do. One thing that we did for The Last Express and also for Prince of Persia: The Sands of Time a few years later was kind of the opposite of the way that most games did it, is that instead of doing the cinematics and then bringing in actors to do the voices, we started with just a sound room and had the actors do the dialogue as if it were a radio play, and then created the animation and the cutscenes later to match the edited version of the sound that they had done. So, the idea being that this would get a more spontaneous and organic performance, but it really let the actors also gave the possibility to improvise and to create and to find the characters in the recording booth, and which is actually the way that Disney did it for animated features.
That's the way all cartoons are.
Actually. Bring in actors, let the actors do what they'll do. Sometimes they'll do something crazy. They'll create a new voice or whatever, and then take the best of that, and then the animators have the job of creating the visuals to match.
Absolutely.
I mean, this was all made possible with the advent of CD and the ability to store vast amounts of audio. And I'd like to just briefly talk. We did a game called Beneath a Steel Sky, and the contempt that actors was absolutely in show. My sister's friend's boyfriend was at the Royal Shakespeare Company, and he said, "Oh, I'll get some mates, and they can organise a studio." The studio was actually his mate's front room on Balham High Street. You won't know Balham High Street, but all the buses go past and everything would kind of shake. And there was absolute chaos. We didn't actually have a director, and I didn't really know what I wanted. So they'd go, "Oh, how about this?" And they'd put silly voices on. But I remember them going off for lunch. And he said, "Come on, lads, let's go off to the pub." And I said, "Really, should you be going to the pub?" "Yeah, it'll be fine. It'll be great. It'll loosen up." So I went off to the pub, came back about an hour and a half, must have had about 3 pints.
No.
And I said, "Thank goodness they're back." "Hang on a second. No. Lads, who wants to have a spliff upstairs?" So they came down drunk and stoned. And so you can imagine the quality. And I'm very grateful to Konami, because Konami in America got this. And they said, "We cannot understand a word of it." And there was a good reason for that. So we actually re-recorded with proper actors and actually got it right. But that was a baptism of fire.
You talk about CDs, talk about how primitive things were. The first time we saw a CD at Origin, somebody held it up and we all looked at it like apes being shown the monolith in 2001 and said, "No one will ever fill one of these up." We were wrong about that.
The other thing we said is nobody's ever going to be interested in vinyl again. And who would have thought that kids are really thrilled by vinyl in the way that, well, certainly I was, and probably all of us were when we were kids. Yeah. It's extraordinary.
If only we kept the old vinyl and also kept the old games in their boxes.
Now you're hurting me. You're hurting me.
My vinyl collection started when I was in late high school, when I went out to the shed and dug through my dad's old collection, and there's a lot of stuff in there. Maybe hadn't aged too well, wasn't to my taste at the time. But he did have like Dark Side of the Moon and a couple other classics, and that was
I
kind of
sold
how
all
I
of
started
my records
collecting.
for 25 cents a piece at a garage.
Oh no!
Yeah.
Brutal.
Well, don't get me started talking about Magic cards.
Khris and Warren, did you both had overlap with Mark Hamill at certain points in games that you worked on, right?
Mm-hmm.
Any fun Mark Hamill stories by any chance?
He completely ignored me.
No.
It's like I didn't exist. He autographed one of the Wing Commander cards for me, and then hey kid, you're bothering me. Go away.
Oh no.
Yeah.
How about you, Khris?
Total opposite. Yeah, he was Ritberger for us, and he was in full motion video in Wing Commander, and we were so impressed. I remember sitting in the Scumlet office watching it and being like, "Oh my gosh, look at that!" But in Full Throttle, we had him as Ritberger, and he was wonderful and hilarious and generous, and continues to be wonderful and hilarious and generous, and just we went to Musso and Frank's and oh my God, goofed around, and just a lovely, lovely human being.
Were there any now famous actors that you worked with across your games that at the time were just young nobodies?
Oh, definitely. In terms of voice acting, Tara Strong is Miss Minutes in the Loki show, and she was Twilight Sparkle, and lots of voice act like Steve Bloom. Certainly, Jordan had the great joy of working with Yuri, who now is nominated for a BAFTA in Spider-Man, so he probably learned from you, and he's a great friend.
I think Sands of Time was one of Yuri's first video game voice actor roles. He was, of course, Ben 10 already, but now he's Spider-Man, and that's hard to top.
I don't know. Prince of Persia is like the coolest. It's the coolest. They're both cool.
I met somebody today at the book signing at GDC who said that they got into acting because of Yuri Lowenthal.
Oh, that's the best.
Was he the prince in Sands of Time?
Yuri was the prince in Sounds of Time.
Okay,
yes.
That's great.
Yeah, we met in a voice recording studio, much like this one.
So Jordan, I saw your GDC talk earlier today about the making of Karateka, and one of the things you mentioned in your talk was that you had cut the Sand Griffin from Prince of Persia, Sands of Time. That was like Sand Griffin. Was that the right name?
The Sand Griffin. Yes.
That was that was like one that kind of still stung for you, that you had to cut it to get the game out. I love stories about pieces of games that you wanted to be in there but couldn't make it. So can you give a little eulogy for the Sand Griffin?
Sure. Well, of course, in today's Karateka talk, the eulogy was for the leopard. That was for anybody old enough to remember Karateka on the Apple II. The villain Akuma had a hawk that he would send out to attack the player, and he was also going to have a leopard in his menagerie, which I had to cut because I had to go back and finish college, and there was no time. But yes, the Sand Griffin was always going to be the penultimate boss in the Sands of Time, and we had great concept art, and a level had been built to highlight the Sand Griffin, but we had to ship for Christmas, and ultimately that was one of the hard decisions the team had to make.
Yeah, when I was working on Deus Ex, I came up with a mission series that the team, was going to implement and make better, because that's what teams do. And I had two missions. One was a Denver airport conspiracy mission, which I cut that one because it was so crazy no one would believe it. Underground tunnels, holding pens with barbed wire to keep all the baby children who go missing from getting out, so they could be eaten by shape-shifting aliens, including the royal family and the Bushes. They're lizard people, shape-shifting lizard people. I thought that might undercut the believability of the game, so that one didn't make it. And the other one was, I knew a lot more about the world of Deus Ex than ended up in the game. That's what you want in a world Bible. You want that stuff to inform what goes on in the game, even if it doesn't end up in the game itself. And so there was a Russo-Mexican alliance that poured over the Rio Grande into Texas to attack Austin. And so, I mean, invading armies, and my team said, there's no way we can do an invading army in this game. So that got cut. It was very sad. And I've probably cut a bunch of stuff, but I've put it out of my mind so I don't cry at night. But I did kill. I had to kill a variety of games. One of which was Arthurian Legends. We were going to do an Arthurian game using the Ultima tech. And
so this was at Origin.
Yeah. I had a team. We had missions planned out. We had a map. We had all sorts of stuff, and that had to die, unfortunately.
Do you remember why?
It all came down to marketing and funding. You know, we all love marketing and funding stories.
Gosh, we do.
Anyone else have any bits and pieces from games?
I'd
that
like
they're
to just
sad to lose?
riff off what Warren says about knowing your world. And we've both the great Umberto Eco said, you know that you're in the presence of a lunatic when he starts talking about the Knights Templar.
Foucault's pendulum.
Foucault's pendulum, indeed. And indeed, in many ways, he's right. But what I love talking briefly with Jordan is this extraordinary world that we both got sucked into.
He's going to start talking about the Knights Templar.
No. Well, yeah.
No. Okay, go ahead. I love talking about the Knights
only
Templar.
to say that isn't it so exciting? Because you did the same. You must have done the same thing of actually going into this rabbit hole of extraordinary history. And this is before, of course, Dan Brown came and rather mangled the whole thing. But the real history of the part of the world that you're in is so extraordinary in the southwest of France. Occitania, and there's the passion at the moment is the Cathars, and I don't know if anybody has investigated, but they literally they took 100 of the Cathar soldiers and they blinded them all except for one, and they cut their lips off, and they sent them in this sort of train of humans, 100 soldiers, all blind apart from the man at the front, who just had one eye and all their lips cut off so that they could show what was going on. I mean, that sort of thing is so extraordinary that if you made it up, no one would believe it. But the history is incredible.
I mean, the Middle Ages has so many incredible moments and stories and visual. I mean, actually, I just saw Dune 2 in theaters, and it made me realize just how much, and I loved Dune when I read it as a teenager. And of course, I think that the movie is wonderful, but it's so steeped in medieval history. And of course, the most successful TV series for many years, Game of Thrones, is also like the Middle Ages sort of transposed to a fantasy.
War.
Yeah, it's and the Crusades, the Cathars. I mean, I think before we started recording. We were talking, and I said that I started to read about the Templars because I was looking for a backstory for a present-day thriller, but the actual story of what the Knights Templar were and what happened in their trial in the 14th century was so much more gripping that I wrote that instead, and that became my first graphic novel.
I did a World War I flight simulator, of which I am inordinately proud, Wings of Glory. It's I won't start waxing rhapsodic about that game, but I did a ton of research, and I think it shows in the work. It's what separates. It's a nice little game from something really compelling and cool and lasting. That's the other thing. We've all worked on games. This you didn't ask about this, and it has nothing to do with anything. But I am happy to be at a table with people who made things that are long lasting. That's one of the other things about Other Side. We don't want to create, well, it's a fun game, and then 3 months later or 3 years later, people have forgotten about it. People still talk about System Shock. People still talk about Jordan's games and everybody's games here. And I think that's in part because we take it seriously. It's not just a way to pay the mortgage. It's more than that. And we dive deeper into the content before it goes on the screen. And I think players see that and they appreciate it. And frankly, I don't care if they do because I'm going to do it anyway.
I think everyone here has worked on either a remaster or a re-release or some version of a game that you worked on earlier in your career, bringing it back in some form for players, decades later. I'm wondering if you have any reflections on that experience of whether it's just revisiting your own work and kind of remembering where you were in your life when you did that original thing, or something you see and you're like, well, I can do that way better now.
Well, hearing that, I think of Prince of Persia, which has had so many lives. And, the first version as a 2D game in the 80s, and then the sequel to that, you could say that it was so long between the first Prince of Persia and the Sands of Time that was almost like a rebirth. It was a second life. And working with the team in Montreal, it was a young team. At 36, I was the oldest guy on the team, but we were making a game for the PlayStation 2 generation that probably had never played or didn't remember, playing Prince of Persia as a 2D game on PC, much less remember the Apple II. So Prince of Persia was a kind of an inspiration to make a game, but it wasn't really a remake. We were making a new game that had to be good, that had to stand on its own right, and also had to be Prince of Persia. And then adapting that game again a few years later as a movie in a different medium, again, that was its own thing. I mean, Jerry Bruckheimer, God bless him, had not played the game, didn't care about the games. He wanted to make
Welcome to Hollywood.
A Jerry Bruckheimer movie. And so Prince of Persia had to be that. And what's funny now is meeting people who are usually about 30 years old, who, when they hear Prince of Persia, for them, that's the movie. Jake Gyllenhaal, they actually hadn't played the games. And that the PlayStation 2 generation, now that was 20 years ago, there's now a new generation of gamers that don't even remember that one. So it's in my case with Prince of Persia, having sort of accompanied so many adventures in so many different media and formats, I feel like this is a character that's just like the 1001 Nights is just sort of meant to be reinvented and reborn and retold, and that all of these sort of different versions can somehow coexist.
Yeah, I've never worked on a remaster myself, but System Shock getting remastered recently was, people still care about a game I worked on 30 years ago. That's cool.
Yeah.
Deus Ex, people are still playing it 24 years after it shipped. That's cool. Epic Mickey was just announced a remaster is coming out on that 15 years after the game shipped. Making things that last is, when you get to my age, I'm 68, proud of it, and the word legacy actually comes to mind for me probably more than it should. I want to leave something behind that's bigger than me, and Deus Ex in particular is that for me, because I my team and I made it. Let's be clear, teams make games, not individuals. But we made that game, and then later on, when Eidos was acquired by Square Enix, a new series of games set in that universe came out. And people would ask me, how do you feel about that? Doesn't it bother you that someone else is making it? It's like, no. I participated in the creation of something bigger than myself, that has a life of its own, that has some, cultural impact. And it's like my baby grew up, it's like, who's upset about a baby growing up? So that was pretty special. And I want to keep doing that.
I think it'd be fair to say that certainly in Adventures, we have the most extraordinary community. They're really nice people and incredibly passionate. And I mean, given the demographic, certainly for Broken Sword, the majority are men, but the most passionate are women. And they talk about playing with their parents. They talk about, then we've got 3 generations. You guys will have exactly, all of you, sorry, it's Chris, you'll have people who've played your games for 3 generations. And, wouldn't it be fantastic to think that maybe in 20, 30 years, they'll still be playing them? And that Warren is, sorry, I'm just repeating exactly what you just said, but it just makes you very proud to have actually created something in this extraordinary medium that has lasted and means so much to so many people.
And it's so hard too, because it's not like film where, the film is in a sense a solved problem. The position of the sprocket holes hasn't changed in 130 years, and until digital audio came along, the way audio was recorded hadn't changed since 1928. Sound on film was an early development. Editing techniques, MTV better, those folks who made music videos better say a little prayer of thanks to Eisenstein and Lev Kuleshov and Podovkin and all these Russian filmmakers. Editing techniques, D.W. Griffith, for crying out loud. But it's hard because the hardware changes so fast that playing games, 20 years later becomes difficult. Try playing a game that's on a CD now, or on a cartridge. It's tough. Thank God for emulators.
I'm still stuck on what you said about sprocket holes.
Well, it's kind of true.
Khris, when you were working on, you worked on the remasters for Day of the Tentacle and Full Throttle, is that right?
No, they were actually done at Double Fine by those old DAT tapes were taken in and digitized by Camden Stoddard, who is the audio. I don't know what his actual title is, but anyway, yeah. So he did all of that, bless him, because the DATs were in the archives in a barn on the ranch. And they had to do a bunch of stuff to, because as to speak to what Warren is saying about just the friability of media, the aging of media, they had to actually bake them in a small low temperature oven to be able to get all of this, to have access to all of those assets. And Camden, again, praise his name, did all of that, just incredibly arduous stuff. Yeah, I didn't work on the remaster, but I do. Thinking about, legacy, and just thinking also tying back to this concept of storytelling and going deep and everything, people who are listening to this and thinking about the speech given on the stage about layoffs and about the importance of investing in your teams. And as Warren said, putting your energy into your team, that teams are not, that it's an auteur free zone. I was just thinking about the depth and the passion, that Charles was talking about, and the room that is made for that exploration, for research, because thinking of legacies and thinking of why people are so passionate, it is the storytelling and the design and the character. And so having that research behind it so that it's not just sort of a pasted together, unearned crazy quilt of narrative moments, but it's a holistic thing. That's the thing to me that stands out. I have the people at this table, I'm just trying to not freak out constantly, just looking at these faces, because the work is incredible and it's that passion, and that's what I want to see exist in the industry moving forward.
Well, let me ask a question if I can.
You can.
Okay. So you mentioned auteurism, and I have real problems with that word in a weird sort of way.
Yeah.
On the one hand, without my teams, I'd be nothing. I really do hire people smarter and better than me. I set constraints, and as long as they work within those constraints, they can do whatever they want. So every detail in every game I've worked on belongs to someone on my team or to my team members, not to me. I make sure they stay within the constraints, but that's all I do for a living. Leave me out of it, except that my teams make the games.
Yeah.
But you can tell a Will Wright game from a Sid Meier game, from a Tim Schafer game.
Yeah.
So are we in a tourist medium or not? I have wrestled with that and I can't figure it out.
Is film an tourist medium?
Well,
I don't know.
It was in the days of Federico Fellini
and
Ingmar Bergman, but it isn't anymore.
It's interesting because I'm reading a book, Hollywood, The Oral History by Janine Bassinger and Sam Wasson. Fantastic book. And it's interviews with probably hundreds, but a lot of people who made movies from the early silent days until today. And all of them say that the golden age of Hollywood was a producer's medium, not a director's medium. And I've spent a lot of time thinking about and writing about movies from a perspective of either it's an institutional medium or it's an auteur medium. And the people who are working in the medium don't see it that way, which is interesting. I mean, I'm still an auteurist. I have become an auteurist in my old age, but it's just such a fascinating question to me.
I think it's a bit partly about marketing too. When David O. Selznick or Walt Disney put their signature across, the title screen of the film, naturally their films are going to be associated with them.
You literally just named the two people after whom I have modeled my life and career. I'm serious. Selznick, I cataloged the Selznick collection at the University of Texas.
Wow.
That and Walt Disney were my models. I don't want to say my heroes, but that's weird that you did that.
Well, I mean, me too. As a child, I saw the Walt Disney signature and logo on the cartoons and animated movies that touched me, and I wanted to do that too. But it's not an accident that we know the names of those two people because they put it up front, signed in their handwriting.
Yeah.
And now, since then, having read books, like the Nine Old Men, the Disney animators writing about how they developed those things and how it actually went down, you realize how it was a team effort.
Warren, you mentioned the phrase "the golden age of Hollywood" a moment ago. To ask maybe a slightly loaded question, what was the golden age of video games, or have we yet to see it, or are we in it right
Next
now?
week.
Yeah, it is forever now.
It's forever now.
Yeah.
What about games do you think maybe makes it different from? I don't know. I feel like for decades, people in movies feel like we tend to glamorize the past in a way that maybe games glamorize the present.
Well, you've stunned us to silence.
The profundity.
Really.
Well, one topic that I think maybe Warren, you could speak to a little bit is I'd love to talk a little bit about the kind of transition for games when 3D was first starting to become like the dominant technology for making games. We're moving from 2D to 3D, and it must have been a very, very exciting time to make games, but also probably a very rough and challenging, and figuring out how to use the hardware and what software was capable of. Any kind of stories or memories from that transition?
I mean, rough and challenging is what we do. I talked to a potential partner recently and said, they said to me, the idea you just pitched us sounds risky and complex. And I said, yeah, that's what I do. If you don't want that, let's not work together. But it's always been risky and complex and rough and all. But I remember Paul Neurath, who is my partner now. We've worked together several times in the past and are working together again. He started a company called Blue Sky, which became Looking Glass. And he and an engineer who worked for him came to us. And he showed us at Origin, he showed us a tech demo of a real-time first-person 3D fully textured world. You could look up and down. I mean, it was, and everybody else was. I don't know what they were thinking. Okay, but I was thinking, the world just changed. It will never be the same again. And so I've worked in that space ever since. I mean, I've never made a 2D game. Most of the games I've worked on have been first person, except for Mickey, and I can't talk about anything else. But no, I mean, it was that light bulb going off, the potential of it, and what you could do, and how immersive games could be, instead of controlling a puppet. It could be you in that world. That was immensely powerful. And I earlier I talked about the computer game developers simulating the wrong things about role playing. That it was all like little squidgy 64 pixel tall guys, and character stats, strength, dexterity, intelligence, wisdom, and character classes, and monks can't wear armor and all that. I mean, that's not what makes role playing, role playing. That's ROLL playing, not ROLE playing. And with that first person technology, all I was thinking is, I can put you in that world, not some little puppet, I can put you there. And so from that moment on, I had no interest in doing anything else.
Before we wrap up, which is unfortunately going to have to be very soon, I did want to kind of address the legacy mention that Khris, you made, and the fact that one of the big topics of conversation at GDC this year has been the layoffs that you referred to, that someone mentioned at the GDC Awards this year. Given that you've been in the games industry for a long time, I'd love to hear all of your, or whoever wants to speak to it, your perspective on, why there have been so many layoffs in the last couple of years in games, and also kind of speak to the real impact of that. One point that I've seen some people bring up is that how important the sort of continuation of knowledge is within a studio. That losing a person is of course important, but also people are not just interchangeable, that it takes so long to build up the skills to design a game or direct great voice acting, that there's a real loss there. So yeah, if anyone wants to speak to that, that would be welcome.
Well, I think part of the problem, of course, is that the industry is so dominated by finance now, whereas it never used to be. It used to be just young people writing games for other young people. And the tragedy about what's going on now is that it feels completely false. Some financial people saw the incredible increase in video games during lockdown, and it was obvious that it was then going to calm down, and they just thought that the chart would go on. So I think people are absolutely right to feel very angry, because a lot of people have lost their jobs, and it just all feels a little bit futile to me.
Yeah, when I'm feeling hopeful, which is almost never at this point, I assume either it's going to come back, which maybe it will, but the other thing, okay, this is me being hopeful, which almost never happens, but I'm gonna be hopeful for now. When things like this happen, lots of people are out of work, or a place like Looking Glass shuts down. It's a tragedy, and I don't want to minimize that. But what it could mean is a bunch of indie developers start up. That all those people are going to be like dandelion seeds blowing in the wind, and eventually they will drop to the ground, and something will grow from them. And so my hope is that Other Side Entertainment can hire many of them. He said, sort of self. Anyway, I'll be quiet on that. No, but I hope what we see is, more indie developers growing up. Now, that has its own problems with discoverability and all of that. But the truth is, like, right now, one of the huge differences between now and when we started was, if you have a game idea, there's a game engine that will help you make it. And there are so many ways to reach an audience that you can reach an audience, and there are so many business models you can make money. Now, discoverability is a huge problem. I'm not saying it isn't, but my hope is that those dandelion seeds will make it to market, and we'll have some great games. I'm probably completely fooling myself.
No, I think you're right.
It's great to hope, right? Well, since we're here at GDC and we need to wrap up, I just kind of wanted to ask. It feels in spirit of being at an event. If any of you have any really fond memories or wild stories from your years of being in the games business and going to conventions and going on promotional tours for games or books, or the wild places you've ended up in your career.
Can I tell one briefly, because it's kind of relevant actually to a previous conversation. When I briefly flirted with Hollywood, when I was asked by Take-Two to get involved with the Da Vinci Code, the game of the Da Vinci Code, and they said, "Can you come over to meet Ron Howard in Los Angeles?" And I said, "Yeah." And they said, "We'll pay you a consultancy fee. We'll send you business class." And I was sitting back, and then I said, "What do I need to prepare?" "Nothing. You just come. You don't need to prepare anything." So that's great. So I'm sitting back going, this is Hollywood. Wow, this is fantastic. I should be working in Hollywood. This is just what we should be doing. And I arrive at Imagine Productions, and the vice president, senior vice president of Sony Pictures is there. She says, "Charles, thank you so much for coming. It's absolutely great that you're here." I go, that's thanks, Julie. She says, but it's going to be very contentious. If I was you, I'd sit at the back and just leave it. We're going to sort it out. But the fact that you're here means the world. And it's great. So I sit at the back and in walks Ron Howard. And he goes, guys, I'm really sorry. I've got 15 minutes and I've just come to tell you there can't be a game. And Julie says, Ron, these guys have signed a contract. There's going to be a game. Okay, he says, it's got to come 6 months after. No, it's going to be day and date. Okay, if that's what the contract says, but no marketing. Ron, says Julie, there's going to be a game, it's going to be day and date, and there's going to be marketing. So Ron looks forward and he says, so Julie, what are you going to do with my story? And she sits back and she says, Ron, I'm so pleased you asked that question because we've flown this guy all the way from England and he's going to tell you. And I really had no idea what to say. And everyone was looking around the room for the guy from England. And it was obviously me. And I was able to then talk about the Knights Templar, of course. I was able to say, he asked me where I came from. I said, York in England, which is where Constantine the Great was declared emperor. And he said, no, I thought it was Constantinople. I said, he founded Constantinople, but he was declared. And actually, all of that stuff, all of that nonsense from the Holy Blood and the Holy Grail paid such enormous dividends because, bless him, he didn't actually know anything about. He didn't know anything about the Knights Templar and all of this sort of stuff. And it was just great. So anyway, that was my flirtation with Hollywood.
I've got a bunch of Hollywood stories we don't have time to tell. Maybe some other time. But if you ever get a chance to shake John Woo's hand, do it because he has the warmest, softest hand of anybody I've ever met. No, but you ask about GDC. The first GDC I went to, it was the Computer Game Developers Conference back then. There were 350 people, and I was in awe. I went to panels and thought I would never know that much about games in my life, and half the people who were speaking became friends later on. And I was at dinner with Richard Garriott, and Brian Fargo walked up to say hello to him, and I lost it. I mean, I blubbered like an idiot because he was one of my heroes, and it's just a sign that, and he was perfectly, wonderful and generous, and it just shows, game developers we're good people. By and large. Maybe not the finance guys, but the rest of us are okay.
Anyone else have a story they'd like to share?
For me, one of the greatest things about these conventions is getting to meet people whose work I've enjoyed and admired, but never met them. John Romero, the first time I met him was at GDC in an elevator, and we just happened to be going up, and he said, "Hi," and his first words were, "I sent you a letter in 1985." and
that's John.
In fact, the second letter that I'd ever received as a game author for Karateka was from John, who was at that time 17 years old in England. And I was all of 20.
A real adult, yeah.
That's awesome. That is so John. Wow.
That's wonderful.
And of course he remembered, because John remembers everything.
He has an eidetic memory. No kidding. He really does.
Awesome. Well, thank you all so much for your time. We have run out of it, unfortunately, so we've got to close it off. But it was a pleasure to have you all here chatting about your careers. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you.
Thanks for
Thank
having
you.
us.
Thank you.
The hour flew by.
All right.
God.
Well done.
It's a huge privilege to sit with
Same.
you guys. It's lovely. Thank you.
I don't know.
This was great.
We could have happily gone on for another hour.
I know, right?